Hi, everybody. I'm Mariam Mernejad. I'm gonna present my research first, and later it's gonna be Megan, right? So this is a session where female researchers from Newcastle University are presenting their work. So as I said, I'm Mariam. I'm a research fellow in the School of Computing, Newcastle University. I'm a computer scientist, and today I'm talking about my recent research, which is on a cross-platform evaluation of user online privacy. Next slide. Okay, what's online tracking? Online tracking is collecting data about users online to gain insight into them, their behavior, and their preferences. Online trackings are powerful tools for websites, organizations, companies, for optimizing user experience, personalization, statistical purposes, and more importantly, profiling users for targeted advertising. However, from the user's point of view, it's not clear how, when, and by whom this tracking is happening. Tracking in practice happens via different technologies, namely IP addresses, cookies, devices, and browser fingerprintings. And it happens in all sorts of platforms. It could be your laptop, desktop computers, mobile devices, your smartphone, your tablet, and even IoT devices. Now let me talk about the GDPR. The General Data Protection Regulation is a law on data protection and privacy in the European Union and for all the European citizens around the globe. So Megan has gone off, but I just continue with my presentation. The GDPR came into full effect in May 2018, so it's been over 2 years now. And within this law, the consumers, for example, online users, are granted more rights in controlling their own information. This includes the right of not giving any personal data to these businesses, like to these websites and companies and so on. Businesses are allowed to collect and process personal data only if they get the consent from the user, from the customer. And if they don't do so, if they don't comply with the law, it may result in an enormous fine up to 20 million euros. And in practice, there exist independent authorities such as Information Commissioner's Office in the UK that to uphold information right in the public interest. And the actions that can be taken within this platform is to pay for fee, to report a breach, or make a complaint. Today, because it's a digital women event, I'd like to name a few women playing significant roles in protecting user online privacy. The first one is Elizabeth Denham. She is the UK Information Commissioner at the ICO, and she has set out a commitment to increase consumer trust people have in what happens to their personal data. She has done high-profile investigations on big companies such as Yahoo, WhatsApp, and Facebook, which has led to great fines, fines because they haven't complied with the law. The next one is Margaret Vestager, and she is the European Commissioner. And according to The Economist, she is the rich world's most powerful trust buster. And she also has had high-profile clashes with the American firms, for example, Facebook, WhatsApp, and in particular, the one with Google, when she ran a long-running investigation resulted in a 2.4 billion euros fine against Google for using its search engine to promote its own shopping service. And you can see lots of other examples done by these women in relation to protecting a user online right. But next, talking about my own research, obviously I'm a computer scientist, so I've been studying systems. This research that I've done in the last couple of months have been already published as a research paper in this conference, which is called Euro Usable Security and Privacy 2020. And in this research, I conducted a cross-platform study on 3 different platforms, on PC browsers, mobile browsers, and mobile apps. And the study has been done on top 116 EU websites and their corresponding Android apps, 101 Android apps, which are all in English. And I conducted these experiments in April and May 2020, where most of the UK countries been in lockdown. The evaluation that I've done included investigating how the privacy notice is presented in different browsers, Firefox, Chrome, and Brave, and on mobile devices and PC, as well as mobile apps. So a wide range of experiments has been done. And I also studied the user control options. For example, as a user, when you go to a website, you see this cookie notice that whether or not I studied if within these websites, whether or not you can reject, accept, go to further settings, or any other options. In the next set of the experiments, I also studied the actual tracking activities that is happening within these popular websites and before the user engage with the privacy policy. And I used a couple of security and privacy tools and apps, namely Brave and Lumen, which I'm going to explain later. And finally, I also went through all the links that were provided within these websites and apps to see what are the other privacy enhancing technologies that offered to the users. So somehow we can look at what I've done here as a GDPR reality check and see what is actually happening in practice. So the results. First, I found out that the privacy notice location across these websites and apps and platforms, for example, on PC and mobile, are not consistent. They can be on top of the screen, middle, bottom, full page, as a new page, so very inconsistent across services, browsers, and platforms. But more importantly, I found that the most popular designs on these websites and apps are not necessarily the most effective ones in terms of the likelihood of the user engagement. What does it mean? It means that there exist lots of dark patterns on the web, which actually is nudging the user to accept these privacy policies and notices. Moving on, this is an example of the inconsistencies that were found in location, user options, and the content of the privacy notice of a website in a mobile browser on the left hand and its mobile app on the right hand side. And if you notice, you can see not only the location of these privacy notices are different, but also the user's options are different, and the language and the terminology that is being used by these two privacy notices are different as well. Given that the same company is behind the two services, these inconsistencies would affect the user experience. In the next set of the experiments, I went through the control options that are available to the users. Again, I found that these control options are not the same across the web services, apps, browsers, and platforms. And again, the majority of these services nudge the user to accept the notice. This is a practice which is not compliant with the law. If you look at these tables, those red parts and numbers which are high are actually the ones that are not offering the best practices to the users. What does it mean? It means that when you open a website and it shows you a privacy notice, and in the second category, agree or settings, it's not offering you a fair practice. For example, it doesn't put reject right next to accept. It only puts accept or agree or okay, or provides little links to further options or settings that you can go through a frustrating experience to be able to opt out. So this is, again, is not compliant with the law. And now if you want to do a little more technical research here, I decided to go through these websites and apps and to find out if they are actually tracking the user or not and how they are actually doing it. It came as a surprise to find out that the majority of these services start tracking the users the moment that these websites are loaded in the browser or the app is open, even before you engage with the privacy notice. So what does it mean? It means that this is another non-compliant behavior which was observed in all browsers, all platforms, browsers and apps on PC and mobile. And this is really worrying because it means that no matter what are your motivations or efforts in terms of dealing with these privacy notices, these services are already tracking you. The average tracking activities on Windows were less than Android, but they were highly correlated. It means that if a website is tracking you intensively on a PC, it's doing the same on your mobile as well. I also found out that Android apps tracking were generally less than website, because obviously apps are younger than websites, like in terms of the usage and being in the market and everything, but they're still moderately correlated. It means that if a website is tracking you very intensively, it is doing the same. It's on its corresponding app as well. I also found out that the privacy notice itself can be a tracker. As you can see in this figure on the right side, we can see the cookies that are set in the browser before any user interaction with the cookie notice. So the cookie notice itself may contain some sort of tracking files and cookies. This is an example of Android app cookie consent. On the left, as you can see, you either can say, I got it, which means that I accept, or go through the cookie settings, which will require you a few more clicks to opt out. And on the right side, you can see this privacy enhancing app, which is called Lumen on Androids that are used. This, according to this app, this particular app on the left side has already started tracking the user before engaging with the privacy notice. And out of the 3 domains that it has contacted within 1 hour, 16 of them are trackers. And that's not really a good practice. So at the final part of my experiments, I decided to see if I was a user who wanted to opt out and who wanted to go through the hassle of clicking all these pages and buttons and just take care of my privacy. What are the options out there? Obviously, there are lots of options that are offered by the services. Namely, you can opt out from being tracked through browser settings, for example, by activating Do Not Track or by deleting cookies manually. What else? You can also use particular types of add-ons, for example, browser add-ons. For example, Google Analytics opt-out add-on is one of the popular ones. These websites also refer the user, the visitor, to lots of different initiatives. For example, allaboutcookies.org or privacyshields.gov and so on. What else? Some of these companies, and especially the big ones such as Google and Facebook, offer privacy enhancing dashboards that you can access through the website and account settings. What if you are using a mobile device? Mobile devices do have their own settings for privacy enhancing tools and everything. And also within the apps, you can also do some sort of settings that will protect you against tracking. Privacy-oriented browsers such as Brave, that is the one that I used in this research, can also block all the trackers when you visit a website. And last, you can deactivate your account with a particular service or contact the service provider. And according to the law, they are responsible to get back to you and take care of your privacy. The problem with these privacy enhancing technologies that are available out there is that as a user that visits a website or uses an app, you need to go way beyond the first page to be able to find these tools and technologies and practice them. So yeah, this is not very user-friendly or user-empowering, but that's the GDPR reality check that I've done within this research. So to take away the privacy consent banner and the users' options are inconsistent across platforms, browsers, and services, and they are most of them are not complying with the GDPR. And these services, the majority of the services, start tracking the user the moment the user opened this website without any interaction with these privacy notices. And the tracking behaviors of these services that I studied across platforms are intrusive and correlated at the same time. And finally, the current practices of protecting user online privacy are not effective, and the blind spots are increasing as online services are being offered on various platforms, such as mobile and IoT. And finally, if you are asking yourself, what can I do as a user to protect myself? You can use privacy-oriented browsers, for example, Brave, Tor, or use private and incognito mode of browsing. You can take your time with the privacy notice and actually opt out. I know that it's frustrating, but this is what you can do to enhance your privacy. Also, you can consider uninstall unnecessary apps from your mobile device not to be tracked via them, and pay attention to the permissions that you give to apps and websites and all the other online services that you are using. Thank you. So I don't know if I should wait for questions or Megan wants to start her presentation.
You can give it a minute or two if you like.
Yes, we can do that. So I go on the event chat and
we can both share at the same time. Exciting.
Okay, maybe I just stop sharing because I'm just finished with my presentation. I don't see any particular question. Maybe
Truthy Tanaka asked if you'd be able to share your slides.
I cannot see either. Am I looking at the right place? So we go on stage. Sorry, I go on stage, yes. So let's go here. Really interesting talk. Would you be able to share my slides? How am I able to share my slides? You can visit my homepage. All my presentations, I can put them on my homepage, and you can have access to my slides over there. And thank you, Melanie. Sure, I try to share the link here.
Cool, should I go ahead?
Yeah, I think we don't really have a chair here, so it's between the two of us. So go ahead.
We'll manage. Okay, cool. So my name's Megan, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how I got into doing computing education research, which was a bit of a weird journey. So in terms of what I'm going to talk to you in the next 15 minutes or so is about me, looking at human-computer interaction and what computing is in human-computer interaction, and then my research within that sphere. So when I was younger, I always had the feeling when I thought about computing, this was the sort of image that I always thought of. Computing was only about coding and nothing else. So when I was doing my A-levels, we didn't do any sort of there wasn't a computer science GCSE, we just had ICT, and that was very much about using Word. So I was like, well, I can't go to university to do computing because I didn't really pick it up as a hobby. What I did really like at sixth form was history. So when I was thinking about what I wanted to do, I was like, well, I like history, so the only thing I can do is history at university. So I originally applied to Newcastle to do history, got accepted, and then within the first week, I kind of had a bit of a crisis of what am I doing with my life, and asked if I could swap onto the computing course. because I was really interested in games. And I had this great dream that I was going to be a game developer and it was going to be great. Except after I started doing the computing degree, I realised there was a lot of maths. And previously I'd quite liked maths, but for some reason this maths just wasn't going into my head. So I was a bit lost again. I was doing this computing degree, wasn't really sure when I was going to go. And everyone just seemed to be like, oh yeah, I want to be a software developer. And I couldn't figure out what I wanted to be because that's not what I wanted to do. So in my third year, I did a year out in industry and I worked for the National Air Traffic Service as an air traffic control engineer. And that was really cool. I was working in simulation services and engineering, performance, innovation and assurance. And I was like, I have found my place. This is super cool. I get to work on doing a little bit of coding, but it's mostly about the people and kind of about the people involved in the systems and not just about the systems themselves. So when I came back to do my dissertation year, I was like, oh, well, I'm interested in teaching because I originally wanted to be a history teacher. I was interested in games. I was like, how can I sort of swing that to be in part of my dissertation? And I was super interested in the way that people and computers interacted. So my dissertation was this online game, sort of year 8 students, that was all around computational thinking and how doing computer science wasn't just about coding. And from that, I ended up, rather than going back to the air traffic service, I went on to do my PhD, which is all about computing education and the role that universities can play in partnerships for computing education. And I do this as part of a lab at Newcastle University called Open Lab. Now, Open Lab is all around human-computer interaction. It looks at social computing. It looks how computing is everything and how that kind of affects the way we do things. Put more simply, it's basically how can we use computing to help people in everyday life and how do we support quality of life. Now, I'm sorry if the picture's a little bit blurry, but this is my PhD cohort. There was 11 of us that joined that year. And I kind of wanted to put a picture of them up because it's a very varied lab. So we have academics, we have researchers, designers, we do have software engineers, we have PhD students. Now I'm from a computer science background, but in my cohort, we had sort of like political science people, machine learning, psychology, education, health, people that had been working in those areas and had brought those into the computing side. So they'd never worked in computing before, and this was where they were starting. Because in the lab, we work in lots of different areas. So we do computing, but it's computing within the realms of education, health and social care. What's computing like in digital democracy? How do we get involved in sort of big groups of people? How do we work with the public to have people share their ideas? How do we create cool ways of interacting with technology? And then kind of the more heavy duty computing stuff like machine learning. So I want to talk about other people's research, not just mine, so you don't have to listen to me just talk about me. But to get an idea of computing isn't just about coding, but how it sort of like sits in that social sphere. So FoodFinder was one of these sort of in the health and social care team, which was all about a like place-based app, sort of a little bit like Google Maps, where mothers could review different places, so like cafes and restaurants, on their sort of levels of being breastfeeding friendly. So again, something you might not think about, but it acted as this really cool tool that could support mothers to find places where they might be comfortable to visit. On a completely different spectrum, we have a current project going on called Ongoingness, which helps people explore their relationships with people who have passed on. And the way that works, you can see the little tangible there being held, and it cycles through photos, and those photos are tagged with metadata to help you sort of reflect on different topics, different ideas, different contexts you and that person might have been in those photos. Another super cool one is Gig Academy. So this is a project within the education team. And this was looking at how do we use technology to support students to learn how to put on real gigs for real musicians. So as you can see here, there's a group of kids around a proper soundboard. Now they actually did a full-on gig in a real venue called The Sage, if anybody's been to Gateshead. And they put on a full gig. And what they did is they learned how to do that over the course of a week by using these little proxies that we built in the lab. So these little lights sort of emulated the big stage lights at thousands of pounds for about maybe £25 each. And they built a replica stage, and then the kids could use the same software that they would use on a desk to control these little lights. It was kind of trying to teach them about all these different skills in a way that was accessible. So these kits go out to schools, and BTEC students use them to put on performances. And I've been to a few of them, and they're super cool. Again, something slightly different is the idea of Metro Futures. If anybody has been to Newcastle and used the Metro, it's getting on a bit now. It's a little bit old. And there's been this massive bid to modernise the system. Now, some of the information used in this bid was elicited from work that we did as a lab. And as you can see, it's not just about using technologies, but we go out and talk to people, we work with the community sort of in person and think about how we use some technologies that are appropriate to help us kind of get points across and help the community share what they want to share, and how do they evidence that. So that research ended up part of the bid for the modernisation work. So I think that's happening next year. And then on to my favourite topic, me. So my research comes from a couple of different areas. Now, I'd done computer science, I was interested in teaching, and I was trying to think about what computing meant to me. So there were these 4 different elements that sort of motivated my research. The first one being that computing itself is a form of power. Computing is all around us, and we need to think about how these structures are put in place and how we challenge those structures. And education is the way to do that, or at least to begin doing that. And this was why computing was introduced to the curriculum back in 2013, 2014. But at the minute, especially in schools, early secondary school in particular, young people are struggling to engage with it. So how do we make that more interesting? Particularly in the Northeast, people struggle to gain those digital skills because of pre-existing social exclusion. And research shows that this might only get worse. If there's pre-existing social exclusion, this increased digital exclusion will sort of entrench further. And then what's the role of universities? So if we think about there are quite a few universities in the UK. They have bunches of people doing super cool things, and there's resources, there's knowledge. And schools work with universities, but it can be sort of quite transactional. Universities will go out and say, hey, like, here's this cool robot, you can have it for an hour and then we'll take it back. So how do we go beyond that? So in terms of my research, I'm looking at ways that universities and schools can participate in educational partnerships for computing education. So how do we work together to do something that benefits us both and is sustainable in that way? So particularly around how can I help with curriculum design? Is that resources? Is that visits? What can the university do, and what does that mean for the university? What are the experiences of those people involved? Are we treating everyone equally? Are we making sure there's not some kind of like bias in what we're doing? And then this last one, basically in normal people language, it's how can digital technology support this? What is the role that they can play in creating and sustaining these partnerships? So one of the projects I'm going to talk about, I'll just talk about a handful, was Microvote. So I ran this with a year 8 group, or a year 8 year group. There were 6 classes, and we ran in 2 classes each term. And we wanted to develop a coding curriculum, looked at the transition from block-based to text-based programming, because that's where the schools are really struggling. We had a bunch of BBC microbits, which are sort of like small physical computing boards, and they wanted to use them, but they weren't really sure how. And they wanted to sort of bring in the university to be that sort of cool challenge setter. So we went in, and the first time round, we challenged the kids to make something to improve their school environment. So we had things that like encourage people to wash their hands, or controlling the lunch queues, because the kids all found that their lunch queues were too long. So they were trying to think about how they would solve this problem using computing. The second time round, it was assistive technologies. And the third time round, we did voting systems. So we could kind of help everybody code the voting systems, and then they could decide what issues they wanted to sort of like vote on. So sometimes it was like, what's in the school cafeteria? What should we do next in PE? And trying to think about how computing can support these democratic processes. So this was all developed in collaboration with the school and with the students. And then at the end of the project, one of the teachers and I wrote a paper together. So thinking about how we took that and kind of the practice-based stuff and then shared it with the computer science education community. The second one round, now this was in the middle of running, and then we've had lockdown, but I still talk about it because I think it's quite interesting. Basically in Newcastle, there's a big project around sort of computing and ethics and fairness, and how do we get all these different people involved in deciding what's fair, sort of like in algorithms that affect our daily life, in digital security. And if anybody's taken a look at the curriculum for this in schools, it's quite dry. And the teachers and I were like, well, how can we take some of the things that we talk about at university, things like Mariam's research, and how do we begin to create this dialogue between schools, teachers, and young people who have these questions and academics? So the idea was that we'd give a prompt, the young people would generate a bunch of questions. Those questions would go to academics, and then academics would record sort of short responses, videos, audio, written text about their responses. So it could be their experiences, their research, their ideas, or in return sort of challenges that would go back to the kids, and this would develop an ongoing sort of pool of resources around computing ethics. And then finally, engagement and place. So I was doing a project with the School of Chemical Engineering and Biomedical Engineering, and we were talking about how they had these sort of like £20,000 prosthetic hands. They wanted to take them into schools, but when they did, they broke. They couldn't afford to replace them. And they were thinking, how do we do outreach? How do we engage with schools around our work without having to take £20,000 worth of kit in? So together we designed sort of these robot hands and created a bunch of learning activities that the kids could use to engage, and like the researchers could talk about sort of the biomedical engineering side, and then we talk about the computing side and get them to code their own hands, and then usually they would sort of race them across the table. Now, even beyond research, sometimes I just get sort of a free day to mess around with different things. So I tend to use, I mentioned before, the BBC microbits. They're sort of £15 half credit size microcomputers, but they're super versatile. So I was in the left-hand video there, I was working with the accelerometer to change the colour of lights. On the right-hand side, I built sort of like a model smart house for an exhibition day with Gateshead Libraries. So it was all using microbits to do different things. We had the plant waterer, we had tweak controllable lights, and then in the middle we had a little game simulator that was all run on the microbit. So it's not just about sort of like the organizational side of things, but I also do get to play around with fun computing bits and bobs that are sort of tangible and real, and you can kind of make them super cool. So in terms of like summing up, my research looks to show how computing isn't just about hardware, software, and programming. There's more to it than that. It's a much broader picture. It can be connected with other disciplines like psychology, health, education, democracy, and beyond. There's really no limit. And it equips us with these skills to look at our society and enact our social, political, and economic agency. So that's it from me. Thank you for listening. I've got my contact details there if you have any questions that we don't manage to answer in this session. Yeah, thank you. I've just seen your question, Mark.
Yeah, I thought maybe you can explain a little bit more about what you do, because you mentioned about all those social stereotypes in the society, which is discouraging women to study computing science and engineering, for example. Mm-hmm. What are you doing as a part of Newcastle University, for example?
I think it's hard to say, because I think a lot of times I've talked about doing activities for sort of like young girls, people tend to always go to like, well, we'll do something about wearables, or we'll go to where we think young girls are interested. Actually, the really interesting thing about working in year 8 is it's like a mixed gender class, and you would find people just take to those challenges slightly differently, and giving students the option rather than pigeonholing them into saying like, oh, we'll do something about wearable designs, was actually a lot nice, because some students wanted to take on things that were sort of more technical. Some students wanted to sort of appropriate their designs for their interests. So we had one group of girls, and it's one of my favourite stories to tell. We had one group of girls who were not interested in computing at all. They would sit at the back of the class and usually look at Instagram. And I went over to go talk to them, because we kind of had that extra availability when I was in the classroom. And I was like, you know, what do you like? What do you not like? And they were like, oh, well, we don't do computing because we like drama. And they had this view that if you did drama, you weren't allowed to like computing.
I see.
So with their project, we tried to find something that would sort of meet in the middle. So they were part of the voting class. So what we did with their group is we helped them. There was a drama room in the school, but it was only open when teachers supervised it. So their voting thing they created was, what day should the drama classroom be open? And then they could vote like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And then say, well, look, Wednesday's got the highest amount of votes. Can we have a teacher to supervise? So once it was like framed in something they were interested in, but I think sort of like the current it's very much focused that sort of.
I mean, after all, it's a very complicated matter to address. It's not like really simple, and there are lots of different factors and entities that need to work together and address this problem in a holistic way. It's not like one person can do. I mean, one person can make a big impact, yes, but sophisticated problems like that need like a collaborative framework to address.
Yeah, I think allowing some room for personalization. So like this picture that's on here with the beautiful unicorn was a project with sort of a local theatre company and a puppetry festival and a code club. And the kids were sort of challenged with making robots. So there was all sorts of students that got involved. Some of them made beautiful unicorns, and you can just see to the right there's like a hand that you shake, and it would sort of talk to you when you took a hand. And kind of giving that room for the students to personalize their responses. They all did some form of computing, but they could kind of fit it to their interest.
I see.
And I found that works quite well.
That's a very interesting observation, to leave room for personalization when it comes to teaching about computing science. Yeah.
Cool. Are there any other questions while we're here?
I didn't see too many questions, so I think Melanie is gonna take over from us, but at 3:30, so we still have like 15 minutes. Let me check to see how. Yeah. Maybe we just need to say goodbye. Let me just check with the organizers.
We'll just hang here in case anybody comes up with anything.
Yeah, you can check the comment section. Yeah, Kobe says that we can end the session if we want, if there isn't anything that we want to discuss.
Cool. Well, I'm happy to wrap up there.
Yeah, me too. I
Awesome.
think the only thing that I want to highlight is that basically to confirm what you say, that computing sciences is not only about programming and coding. It covers a wide range of different topics and interests, and people with different backgrounds are welcome to join different projects at different universities. But also at Newcastle University, we are hosting a few different multidisciplinary projects in the School of Computing. And so it's just a matter of having that set of skills to be able to join a certain project, which is not necessarily programming and coding only.
Cool. Right.
Maybe, do you have like a takeaway message?
I feel like you summed it up pretty well. All smart words have left my brain.
All right. Okay, thank you then. Just bye. Have a nice day, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.